EA. Those two letters bring fear to a lot of people's ears. Pretty poor reputation for hashing out some of the lowest denominator level games with barely any effort, and churning out microtransaction after microtransaction for a poorly made, poorly received heaping mess that they'll go on a ditch for the next big sports game or gaming controversy. But what if I were to tell you there was a game, nay, a pair of games that were so under the radar that it lasted for multiple years under EA's borders, receiving 16 seasons of ever-increasing story content that fans could look forward to on a weekly basis. And based on how good you were at the game, you could receive sneak peeks at future content at prices that would make modern-day EA scoff. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Ryan, this sounds like a legitimately cool idea. How come I'd never heard of a game like this if it was so successful? Well, listen. We know what kind of games I like around these parts, if it's not clear yet. So if you're expecting a version of Anthem where the timeline did not allow for the massive amount of fuckery that happened with that game, or a Mass Effect Andromeda that's not bad, look elsewhere. This isn't going to be that kind of game. And for many reasons, it flew under a lot of people's radars. I, of course, am talking about Cause of Death. Cause of Death is a visual novel / adventure style game, where the gameplay is limited to choosing different dialogue branches or playing very minuscule choice-based minigames to affect how much of said story you get to see. Now, I get it. These kind of games aren't everyone's cup of tea. But I'm going to set out to try to begin to tell you how kick-ass this game used to be. First, before we do so, I want to set the stage a bit. In reality, Cause of Death was not the first game that was made by this team of writers at CenterScore, a faction of EA Mobile, as that was actually a game called Surviving High School. This game released on iOS devices around 2007 or so, although it did predate iOS by appearing on mobile phones back in the 2005 timespace. And wow, look how far we've come. Also, this game released on the Nintendo DS, which also means it was a part of Nintendo Week. You guys remember Nintendo Week? Sheesh, so before Nintendo Directs were a thing, and before Kit and Krista had Nintendo Minute, we had Nintendo Week with Allison and Gary. And Dark Gary. You just have to absorb the 2000s energy here.
I think there's something in the walls.
I don't hear anything. That's just the building settling.
No, I think we have a monster infestation. Did someone say monster infestation?
Dark Gary, where did you come from?
Is that any way to talk to your exterminator? Since when are you an exterminator? I dabble. I've got good news and bad news. Bad news? You definitely have a monster in your wall. I told you.
What's the good news?
Good news? I've got a killer recipe for monster gumbo.
Fresh air. And a roof tent? This looks like a great place to talk about our next game, Surviving High School, coming soon to the DSiWare service. It's the whole experience of high school in the palm of your hand. You can decide what type of student you want to be, a jock, a nerd, a popular kid, or someone a little more offbeat, and pursue the activities you like, date cute schoolmates, and take fun quizzes. The game allows you to shape your high school story any way you like. And you can play multiple times and the story always changes. It's all the fun of high school without the final exams and awkward skin.
Hey, get away from my roof tent.
Your roof tent? You live up here?
Yes. No. Sometimes. What's the difference? Oh, anyway. It's safe for you to come back downstairs. I couldn't smoke the monster out, but I thought of a new plan so complicated that it's foolproof.
We'll see about that.
Yeah, we will.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I'll see you inside.
Will you?
We're not doing that anymore.
Oh, sorry. My bad.
Surviving High School was almost as cliche as you could expect a visual novel-style-centered game around American high school to be. You're the new kid and you're trying to make it through the next day. It was cute, but pretty much like other stories of its nature. I like Surviving High School, but, there wasn't anything really too special about it. I bring up SHS because it is Cause of Death's sister series, And I mean that more than just developer-wise. SHS built the framework that Cause of Death would go on to use for its story structure, where you would go on to play one of 16 detective mysteries through an overarching story similar to that of a TV show. You'd have a few bonus episodes here or there, but for the most part, the format stayed the same. 8 episodes per season tackling a new threat that you as a detective would have to resolve. I'm being vague here about the story because I want to go deeper into it in the next section. For emphasis, this video is going to tackle the very first season of the game, and then we'll move on from there for future videos. And last but not least, I need to thank Amy Chen here on YouTube, a persona of a Cause of Death character herself. This is the only archive of the full game I've been able to find since the game closed down in 2014. For 8 years, this game has become delisted from the App Store, and for the last 4 years, Amy's had the full archive uploaded on her channel, and for very little praise, and this hurts to see. This is a gargantuan effort, so I want to help to add to the field of this series' support, as I recognize 176 videos is daunting. So I'm going to try my best to trim the fat and break this huge series into about 16 or so videos. 1 per season. And finally, I want to bring up where these developers are now, as they've since left EA and have formed their own development studio, Pixelberry, and they are continuing to make mobile visual novels and choice-based adventure games to this day with their catalog game, Choices: The Stories You Play. I will say the flavor of the specific games has waned a bit from what interests me specifically, as there's a lot of romance and reality show-esque stories available. Not to say that they aren't good. I've heard that they are, and they're continuing to be really good at what they do. It's just that the specific style of story isn't my cup of tea. I will say though they did make a spiritual successor to Cause of Death called Most Wanted. It only lasted a single season because there wasn't enough support from the fanbase to justify keeping it around, but it was really good. Who knows, maybe this video will blow up and we'll get a resurgence someday. Alright, with that out of the way, let's do a deep dive. Cause of Death was originally conceived of in 2004 when Center Square paired with EA Mobile to create the first visual novel for phones here in the West. They planned the concept but did not have a writer, and their initial idea ended up morphing into Surviving High School in 2005. The idea for Cause of Death remained on their minds, and eventually it came to fruition on December 16, 2010. Notable game releases from this year were Halo Reach, Mario Galaxy 2, Xenoblade Chronicles. Now, am I going to say that Cause of Death blows all these out of the water? Well, if I was a sensationalist kind of YouTuber, maybe. Would be an interesting thumbnail, though. Anyway, no. It's obvious this game was not on that level, otherwise it would have been successful enough to be remembered more. But gosh darn it, I love it anyway. Big thanks to all the staff on this game. Wikipedia only publicly lists a few specific people, so I do want to point those people out. Of course, if anybody knows any more in depth, I'd love to add an addendum. But thank you to Winchester, Georgia, Doc, Lily, and Rasputin for lending your writing talents to this game. Now with the preamble all finished, let's dig into the game itself. The first season of Cause of Death is different than most other seasons. I know I said before that each season had 8 full episodes per season, and it released episodically over a period of a few months, but Season 1, Mask Maker, released all at once, and it contained only 6 episodes to begin. The only other seasons to not contain the full 8 episodes are Seasons 14 and Season 16. So we'll get to those when we get to those. Obviously, this game released on old iPods and iPhones, meaning their display screen was small. So I'm going to have to try to make this look nice, but they don't make it easy. So, apologies. Beginning the story, we wake up as a young girl named Sophie. Her head aches, and clearly we can see this environment is not the most friendly. Additionally, she notices her hands are bound, and she's lying in a derelict corner of this dank and musty room. Sophie's last memory is being at the club before things got all dark and hazy. When, in the corner of the room, a man fully robed in a white porcelain mask is working on something just out of sight. She notices the glint of a scalpel, and she begins to freak. The first choice of the game is to try to sneak out or scream for help. Now, in the beginning, these choices don't necessarily matter, but some of the later ones will. The masked man prevents any further screams as he rushes Sophie in an instant. Her choices are many as it seems, but in truth they lead to the same end. She manages to get away from him for about a moment, as she scrambles up the stairs when she sees the tumbling waves and the starry night as lights shine in the distance. She's on the water. The masked man appears from behind with a syringe in his hands, and Sophie offers a final rebuttal. If he harms her, the police will be after him. He catches her wrist and she swings at him and forces her down to the ground. He plunges the syringe deep into her neck and pulls down hard, emptying its contents into her bloodstream. Sophie begins to feel faint, and her limbs go numb. She collapses, but still conscious, but just barely. The masked man carries her below deck to his workshop, lying her down on his workbench. He begins applying a layer of plaster across her cheeks, and then up to her forehead, and then down below. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to show the world your true face. He continues to work, plugging her nose and lips sealed with the plaster, leaving the eyes for last. Sophie is paralyzed, unable to move, staring up at the man who'd be her last sight. Her vision goes black and she breathes no longer. So now for something totally different. Beginning the first chapter, we are introduced to one of our main characters right out of the gate, Malachi Mal Fallon, a detective of the San Francisco Police Department. One thing I will say about Cause of Death cast is it starts off by introducing its characters by familiar tropes and archetypes that it will go on to be developed over the course of the various seasons. So here, we have a detective who plays a little loose with rules and has smarmy response to most everything, and is more of a shoot first and think later kind of detective. He's here playing Texas Hold'em with a local, while local TV hosts a news report of the new victim of the mask maker as he continues to elude authorities. It's revealed the killer tends to focus on young women and seals their faces shut with a plastic mask, similar to that of his own visage. Diego questions Mal if he knows anything about the case, and Mal tells him to focus on the game. Now, the choices that matter have come up. Like Mal's choice to call Diego's bluff or fold will earn the player points called detective score. These points are total at the end of each season, and if the total detective score is above a certain threshold, then the player will earn an extra bonus scene equivalent to a post-credit scene at the end of the season. Anyway, back to the story. Detective Ken Green approaches the two boys and tells Mal that he's needed on a case, and that he's unsurprised he's found Mal gambling along with the other Barlow lives. Mal questions the captain's order, as he says he was supposed to be suspended till the end of the next week for punching the mayor's son. Ken says the suspension is lifted as the case is urgent. He's going to be leading the Mask Maker task force, and throughout it all, it's good to have him back. So, Ken Green, I have to say, he's just a general badass, and I hope you guys enjoy him as much as I do. Back on the beat, we meet Captain Maria Young. She readies Mal for the case file, explaining that as little as she likes it, he's one of the best detectives she's got, and she needs the full force of the SFPD to take down the Mask Maker. But she reminds Mal that this case needs to be by the book, as she'll be easily throwing him back on suspension if he disobeys. Mal agrees, and Captain Young says that he should probably call his wife to let her know that he'll be late. Mal's a bit standoffish at his response, but he agrees as he asks for the details of the case. The most recent body is the third Vic in a month. They are all young women, aged 20 to 25, who washed up on the shorefront with the plaster masks on their faces. They weren't able to get a conclusive match for DNA on the latest victim until they get results from the lab, but the student ID in our wallet says she's named Sophie Patterson. Mal heads to the Fisherman's Wharf, where the other bodies had washed up to do some investigating on his own. Mal and Captain Young come up to a woman in a dark suit taking pictures of the scene. She reveals herself to be a federal agent named Natara Williams. Natara reveals that since the Mask Maker has been upgraded to a serial killer status, the Bureau has assigned her to their department to assist with profiling. Now, stop me if you've heard this before. Grizzly detective gets partnered with a smart but socially sharp FBI agent, and the two of them will bounce their opposing energies off of one another while getting in each other's way to eventually solve the crime. And yes, I hear you. But like I said, first we gotta get comfortable with the scene and the archetype, so pick up your popcorn and enjoy the battle of the brains versus brawn. Mal gets territorial over his new case, but Captain Young is quick to assure him that even though she didn't expect an agent out so soon, she did know the FBI was going to be assigning them one, and collectively tells them to get along. Mal formally introduces himself to Natara, and they come to the consensus that there was no sexual aggression toward the victim, but the cause of death was different. The first two victims were strangled, and their masks were applied post-mortem. But as we saw through Sophie's eyes, her mask was applied when she was paralyzed but still conscious. She died to asphyxiation. And so confirms the information is Eric Mills, the SFPD's forensic technician. He confirms to the both of them that the welt on Sophie's neck is evidence of a syringe injection just prior to her death. Natara claims that the matchmaker was getting riskier, He was evolving his method, which meant he was dangerous. Officer Rai calls Mal over, who finds a stamp on her arm with a black light. It shows a circle of animals from the Chinese zodiac. Mal recognizes the stamp from a club in Chinatown. It's an upscale bar called the Zen Club. Natara and Mal decide to check out the club to see if anybody had seen anything out of the ordinary last night. In the car, Natara offers nothing but silence. Mal attempts to bridge the gap by offering small talk, but she breaks it down almost immediately. Mal gets indignant and jokingly asks her if she's profiled him, to which she of course has. Through this, we learn that Mal is not only the first in his family to be in the police force, as he's descended from the very first police chief of the SFPD. Malachi Fallon, who, may I indulge you with the information that this is a real man that really existed as the first chief of police for San Francisco back in 1849. Fun fact, he signed on for a salary of $6,000 a year, which if was translated to modern-day money, including inflation, that would be a salary of $225,000. May the Lord have mercy on all of our bank accounts. Natara also says that Mal's general attitude toward women probably stems from an absent mother, and he's had enough legal trouble in his youth to stem a personality that serves the law without fully respecting it. Mal corrects her on the point about his mom, saying she was a saint, and then does an analysis of his own, saying she must have upset some pretty large people in charge to be tasked with coming down to San Francisco. But it's clear it's a topic she'd rather not go into more detail about, but she does confirm she's on her district chief's shit list. They head into the Zen Club and find some of the staff to ask about Sophie. The club owner confirms that Sophie was a regular, and she had been speaking to a bartender named Jared the other day. As soon as he's named, he perks up and takes off. Mal takes off in high pursuit, chasing Jared through the kitchen to the back door. Natara tries to catch up to Jared as he narrowly dodges an SUV from painting the road with his body. Mal yanks her back to keep her from getting similarly flattened by a bus that she didn't see. Mal leaps ahead and brushes Jared and tackles him down to the ground. And he finds a bag of conspicuous white pills in his pocket. Jared, banged up, knows enough to keep quiet and demands an attorney. Local PD take Jared back down to the station, and Mal returns to Natara, as she seems shaken from the quick evolution of events, and thanks Mal for the save with the bus, regarding him as detective. Please, call me Mal. Back at the precinct, Mal prepares to interrogate Jared, but he reveals to Captain Young he's not 100% certain that he's the man behind it. It's a possibility, but one will have to deduce more to confirm. Natara adds that he fits a few boxes of a common serial killer profile, but he's in a social profession and he's pretty personable, which isn't impossible for serial killers to have, but it is odd. Eric walks up and says that the drugs Jared had on him were hydromorphone, a morphine derivative. It's possible it could induce a high in victims, but it's also likely Jared was just using them to get high. Inside the interrogation room, Mal and Natara meet with Jared and his attorney, Catherine Kretzik. She tells Mal that she's advised him not to speak, which is more than fine with Mal, as he only needs to listen. He brings up the murder charges Jared's looking at, and this unnerves Jared like no other, which easily breaks his silence. Through the interrogation, Mal learns that Jared and Sophie had hooked up previously, and on the night of her murder, she had come to him looking for something harder than the hydros he normally got for her. He refused, and she left the club, searching for a better high, and that the club owner could corroborate an alibi for Jared at the time of Sophie's murder. Mal gets a positive confirmation that such is so with Jared's alibi, so he's set free, and Captain Young says their next step should be to wait for more details from the coroner's report and the autopsy. Natara says she needs to work more on her report, and they break for the night. Mal offers Natara a ride from her hotel, but she declines, saying it'll be more than a fine walk, but says he did well today and calls him Mal for the first time. Be still, my beating heart. Ken appears as Natara leaves, and the two offer each other small talk until Ken asks about Mal's wife, and how happy she must be he's not lounging around on the couch anymore, now that he's off suspension. Mal, again, acts off in his response, and offers his farewells, and goodnights as he heads home to his singular, messy apartment. Mal, done for the day, walks over to his answering machine and plays back the most recent message. It is from that very same wife, Sandra, who we can clearly see is going through a rocky situation with our man Mal here. Sandra is Mal's ex, who's going to be showing up at the end of the week to pick up the rest of her things. And she doesn't expect him to actually answer the phone, as he doesn't want to deal with any of this, apparently. Now that we have the beginning episode set up, I promise we aren't going to be as granular moving forward. Let's pick up the pace. Episode 2. The Masks We Wear. In her hotel room, Natara gets off the phone from her boss, District Chief Blair of the FBI, for an update on the Mask Maker case. He reminds her that she is being closely watched after the Miami debacle. She experiences the moment briefly, remembering an apartment, a toddler, a gunshot, the heat, and a yowl. She returns to the present and asks about Agent Mallory's recovery. Blair reveals that he is in physical therapy, although the doctors doubt his ability to walk again. Natara enters the police station to give a briefing on the Mask Maker profile. He is likely between his 20s and 40s, of above average intelligence, introverted, and has access to a clinic or a hospital. Natara and Mal go to the crime lab for Eric's summary. Bruising found on Sophie's body corroborate that she likely died of suffocation from the mask. Amy Chen, the data analyst of the FFPD, found that the plaster used to make the mask originated from southern Italy. The only place which sells this type of plaster in the area is Italia Imports and Exports. Mal and Natara decide to go check this place out, and they're greeted by the narcissistic store owner Lance Boggs, who immediately comes off suspicious to hostile Mal. Natara, in contrast, uses Lance's narcissism to her advantage and mirrors his behavior. Lance ends up revealing that Sophie was dumped overboard after the mask was made, warranting an arrest. However, he then admits to being in talks with the killer. The mask maker contacted him through the email to sell the mask. Mal impersonates Lance to see if the killer would negotiate the price and meet up with him. Upon arrival, the seller drives off, setting Natara and Mal on a car chase that concludes in a car crash. The suspect is Marvin Clement, a corrupt ex-cop that Mal knows. When they take him in, they subsequently learn that Marvin's girlfriend, a secretary in the case file library, was feeding information about the case to him to profit off of replica masks, confirming his innocence. Natara goes to the crime lab to have her DNA submitted into data to distinguish it from the DNA found in crime scenes. Amy does it for her, who discloses that she is attracted to one of her coworkers. Natara is able to deduce that it's Eric. When asked if she was ever romantically linked with a coworker, Natara confesses that she was, but it ended badly. He was shot. Elsewhere in San Francisco, Brittany Emerson is at a high school party on the beach. She gets a text message from her sister, warning her to call her worried mom. She does so near the bushes, claiming that she's just studying. She's able to placate her mother's worries, and as she's about to return to the party, she is then attacked by the mask maker. As he struggles, he injects her, going further to explain that she looks just like her. Beautiful, disgusting, a stain. He says she might be the one. However, he must first see her true face. Episode 3. Bad Medicine. The team is at East Beach, the site of the bonfire party, investigating Brittany Emerson's murder. Mal notes that the mask maker is beginning to get sloppy and make mistakes, as Brittany was clearly killed on an impulse. Mal and Natara then travel to the Emerson residence to question Brittany's family. It's here Mal learns from Brittany's younger sister Anna that Brittany had lied about where she was spending the night, and that was how she ended up at the beach. Back at the crime scene, Amy Chen and Eric Mills are searching the beach for evidence. Amy discovers some pieces of broken glass, later revealed to be the remains of a vial containing succinylcholine. It is an extremely powerful neuromuscular blocker, not the kind of thing you normally find on the streets. The vial is traced to a Dr. Christian Rose, who spent 90 days in prison after deforming a woman's face by performing plastic surgery while high on painkillers. Natara believes Dr. Rose is the mask maker, as he matches her profile and also has a motive and access to paralytics. Mal, however, is not convinced. The two arrive at an abandoned warehouse, where Rose has been performing under-the-table operations after his release from prison. Inside, Dr. Rose is operating on Miguel Flores, a highly ranked member of a notorious Mexican cocaine syndicate known as the Flores Cartel. After a failed attempt to escort Dr. Rose to the precinct for questioning, a shootout ensues, ending in Miguel Flores' death and Rose's escape. Captain Young is convinced that Dr. Rose is the killer and refuses to listen to Mal's explanation of why he can't be. She officially names Rose the primary suspect in the mask maker investigation during a press conference and instructs all SFPD officers to search for him. Episode 4. Buried Secrets. Despite orders to concentrate on locating Dr. Rose, Mal and Natara remain unconvinced he's the mask maker, and begin their own secret investigation to find the real killer. After comparing the 4 victims thus far, they determine that the mask maker specifically targets red-headed women. They then conclude that the only way the mask maker could have known about the bonfire party is by seeing it from Pacific Heights, an upscale neighborhood located on a cliff overlooking East Beach. They travel to Pacific Heights and question a real estate agent about the neighborhood's residents. She states that there is an eccentric doctor living in one of the houses, who keeps odd hours and wears a white lab coat. Upon searching the house's trash bins, Natara discovers an empty can of plaster from Italia Imports and Exports. They enter the house, which turns out to be completely empty. The living room window offers a perfect view of East Beach. While searching the bathroom, Natara encounters the mask maker and intercepts his attempt to attack Mal. She pursues him through the house, eventually being led to the basement, which appears to be a sort of lair adorned with masks and newspaper clippings about the murders. In the back of the basement, Natara finds the body of a man, appearing to be the mask maker, with a syringe sticking out of his neck. Upon removing his mask, Natara reveals that it's Dr. Rose. That evening, Mal and Natara go out to dinner together, and bond over stories of some of the craziest cases they've been involved in. At the end of the evening, Mal confesses to Natara that his wife left him a month ago, and he proceeds to ask Natara about her past, but she refuses to speak about it. Mal goes home, and Natara returns to her hotel. The chapter then cuts to a brief scene in Tara's hotel room, in which she reveals a large, jagged scar across her shoulder. Meanwhile, Dr. Rose lies in a hospital bed, connected to several monitors and unable to move or speak. When he is left unattended, the real mask maker slips into the hospital room and asphyxiates him to death. Episode 5. Unmasked. After Dr. Rose's death, Mal and Natara return to Pacific Heights home to investigate the mask maker's lair. There, they are greeted by Eric Mills, with whom they discuss the details of the house. It's revealed that the house is leased to an individual by the name of Michael Wrestler. They conclude that it must be a pseudonym, as there's no living person with that name. The investigation continues in the back room of the basement. Mal and Natara find a photograph of a young woman with bright red hair holding hands with a little boy. The boy's face has been cut out with scissors, whereas the girl's face has been violently scratched out. Natara concludes that the boy must have hated the girl, who she guesses was his older sister. The chapter then cuts to a flashback. A boy and his teenage sister are posing for a photograph. The boy does not smile, to which the sister responds with verbal and physical abuse. The boy runs away, slams his forehead into a metal rail repeatedly out of frustration, screaming, "It's not fair!" Back in the present, Mal texts an image of the photo to Amy so she can analyze it at the lab. He then flips it over to find an address printed on the back. While Natara continues to search the lair, Mal visits the home at the address. There he encounters an old woman, who informs him that a family once lived in the house, a mother and 2 children, but it was now empty. She states that a man pays her via checks in the mail to upkeep the home. Mal investigates the basement and finds a hidden compartment filled with animal skulls. The chapter cuts to another flashback, showing the boy torturing a small bird in the basement to his sister's horror. Mal returns to the Pacific Heights home and tells Natara of his findings. She reports that Dr. Rose could not have killed the animals, as he grew up in Wisconsin, not the San Francisco Bay Area. He also didn't have a sister. He was an only child. After examining the basement further, Mal and Natara discover a safe. Other clues in the room lead them to the conclusion that the password is Rebecca, the name of the masked Mr. Sister. Inside the safe is a child-sized white mask. The chapter cuts to a flashback once again, showing Rebecca tormenting her little brother. She tells him he's a stain that needs to be covered up, and forces the mask over his face. It's revealed by the children's mother that the boy will be sent to a mental institution after one last family vacation together. Deeper in the safe is a photograph and a large map. The photograph is a crime scene photo of a young woman's body on a rocky shore, covered by a white sheet. A building with barred windows can be seen in the background. The map is of the San Francisco Bay, and shows X's where each of the 4 kills were made. Natara finds a connection between all of the pieces of evidence. Alcatraz Island. Mal calls Amy and asks her to search for information about any deaths at Alcatraz in 1990. Amy finds an article about a teenage girl named Rebecca Wrestler who died in Alcatraz in 1990. She notes that the police suspect foul play. Rebecca's brother, Brian Rustler, is the only surviving member of the girl's family. He was institutionalized in 1991 at the age of 12 and released in 2006. Mel informs Amy that Brian Rustler is the mask maker. Amy locates the records in the Mental Institute's archives and is shocked to see a photo of Eric Mills on the file. Having heard his name, Eric bursts into the laboratory. Amy quickly hangs up the phone and shuts off the computer's monitor. After suspiciously questioning Amy, Eric instructs her to go home. Just as she's about to leave, however, Eric turns on the monitor and sees his photo and file on the screen. He attacks Amy, paralyzes her, pulls a fire alarm, and escapes with her. Episode 6. The Devil's Island. Mal and Natara and Captain Young speak with Officer William Rye, who claims that Eric knocked him unconscious as he was escaping the lab with Amy. Natara informs the captain that Eric Mills, otherwise known as Brian Rustler, is the mask maker, and will likely take Amy to the site of his first crime. Mal contributes that Eric and Amy will be found at Alcatraz Island. Meanwhile, Eric kills the two guards working at the island, and takes Amy onto the roof of one of the cell blocks. Mal and Natara dissuade Captain Young from bringing in the Coast Guard, stating it would be smarter for only the two of them to go in to take Eric down, as they know the case and wouldn't cause as much commotion. Captain Young agrees, but gives Mal a flare gun to signal backup in case of an emergency. Amy is tied to the chair of the roof of the cell block, and attempts to talk Eric down while she works his hands out for the bindings. She succeeds in getting to open him up about the past, and he explains to her how everything began. The chapter goes into a flashback. While on a family trip to Alcatraz, Brian and Rebecca were walking along the island's beach, and once again calls him a stain. Brian tells her he didn't mean to do anything wrong. Rebecca responded by telling him that he doesn't need to do anything wrong. He simply is wrong, and that she can't wait till he's gone. Brian snapped, and threw a heavy rock at Rebecca's head. She fell face first in the sand. Brian slammed her head over and over and over into the ground, screaming at her, until she was dead. When he rolled her body over, he found that her face was covered by a mask of white sand. Back in the present, Eric tells Amy that he finds the event both terrible and beautiful. He claims that by killing Rebecca, he took away her darkness and revealed her true face. Amy tells him that she cares about him, that he can still get help, and that he doesn't need to kill her. Just as Eric began to consider freeing Amy, he sees Mal and Natara's boat pull up to the island, and leaves to take care of them. Mal and Natara use the empty security office to locate Amy on the roof. Just as they're about to go rescue her, a claymore in the office detonates, rendering Mal unconscious, but Natara is unharmed. She briefly fights with Eric before Mal regains his consciousness and attempts to shoot at him. Eric escapes up to the stairs to the roof, and Mal and Natara follow. Once on the roof, Eric instructs Mal and Natara to dispose of their guns by kicking them over the ledge onto the ocean. They do so, and Eric shoots Mal in the chest, nearly killing him. He tells Natara that he has no use for a macho idiot like Mal. Natara taunts him, calling him a freak, and telling him that his sister was perfect. Eric becomes visibly disturbed by her comments, breathing raggedly and slamming the butt of his gun into his own forehead. After calling him a freak and Stain one last time, Eric begins to charge at Natara, just as Mal passes her the flare gun given to him by Captain Young. Natara shoots Eric, and his robe engulfs him in flames. He falls over the railing onto the roof's edge and drowns. The mask maker is finally dead. Three days later, Natara visits Mal in the hospital. He asks her if she's returning to Quantico, as the mask maker case is closed. She then presents him with her theory that Eric had a benefactor supporting him, citing examples such as Eric's $3 million home in Pacific Heights and his ability to pass the SFPD background check despite being institutionalized as a child. She tells Mal that they will search for the truth together, and the chapter ends with Amy running into the room and throwing her arms around Mal. And since we're starting off with the very first season, we have our very first epilogue and bonus scene for having enough detective points. Epilogue. A young girl we learn to be Neha Mansingh wakes up in a pitch-black room with her wrists bound behind her. She manages to open a door in front of her and falls into a trophy room of sorts, filled with plaster masks, human teeth, and scalps. An older man with a Russian accent and a large burn mark across his face stuns Neha with a taser and orders her to tell him about her sister, Natara Williams. Bonus scene. Mal, Ken, and Diego play poker at McGinty's. It is revealed that Diego was once a CI, which led to he and Mal becoming friends. Mal confesses to Ken and Diego that his wife had left him. Amy and Captain Young eat lunch together in a restaurant. Captain Young tells Amy that she's welcome to take time off of work after her experience with Eric. But Amy says that she's eager to get back to work. Natara's boss, District Chief William Blair, congratulates her on catching the mask maker, but expresses some uncertainty regarding her theory of Eric's benefactor. However, he does allow her to stay in San Francisco to investigate further. Natara enters Italia Imports and Exports, telling Boggs that she'll be in the area longer than she expected and would like some decor for her hotel room. Meanwhile, Miguel Flores' funeral is being held. Esteban and Carlito Flores, two other members of the cartel, are speaking. Carlito is eager to get revenge on Mal Fallon for killing Miguel, his brother. Esteban, his father, tells him to calm down and ensures that Mal will pay for what he has done. And that is it for the first season of Cause of Death. This is a game I really wish got the love and support it deserved, but I'm happy to say that I got to experience it and witness it in its full glory from beginning to end. And that is something to be commended, that they were able to tell the stories they wanted to from beginning to end. Next time, we'll be able to look into the second season and all that it inhabits with The Connoisseur. Check you guys next time.